As many people will be aware, Maplin Electronics, which is effectively the UK's answer to Radio Shack, is currently in administration and is closing all of its stores. Because of this, they've got quite a massive sale on at the moment, and I've been popping in periodically to see what they have. It turns out my local store is one of the better performing ones, so as other stores are closing, the stock from them is getting sent to my local store, so they're periodically getting stuff in, and there's quite a few good deals. Recently I picked up, I think, 95 metres of Cat6 cable for £8.50 or something, which was pretty decent, and loads of other fairly cheap stuff. So I was walking around today just to see what they had, and came across this device. Now, this was in the section where they're actually selling off store fixtures and fittings. So you can buy shelving, you can buy component trays, you can buy tags to stick on shelves. They're selling literally everything. And this was sitting there, and it was like a few quid, it wasn't much at all. So I thought, well, buy it and take it apart for YouTube. It could be quite interesting. So this is obviously a device you would have had within the store, and it says colleague search button on it. And when you press the button, it lights up either the green LED for pass or the red LED for search, and it massively prefers the green LED. So what I'm guessing, and it would be interesting to know if people have actually worked for Maplin that have experienced this, is that the company maybe has a sort of staff search policy to prevent staff stealing stock. So potentially when they leave shift or leave the store, they press this button, and if the red LED comes on, they get searched to check they've not got stock on them. That's a complete guess, so I don't know, but that's what I imagine this thing's for. Now, the reason that I picked it up, apart from it being really cheap, was just that it looks really homemade. And it looks like it's made from Maplin components. Maplin definitely sell that push button, and they definitely sell these panel mount LEDs, as well as these Hammond enclosures that they've always sold. So it looks almost like a device they've maybe designed and built internally, or had built at a really low production quantities. So yeah, I thought, may as well spend a few quid, pick it up, and take it apart for YouTube. So now it is a real shame to see Maplin shutting down. I've moaned about them in the past for being expensive and having like dodgy return policies and stuff, but they've been a really long-standing company in the UK. They've generally been really helpful when I've gone into the store. The staff have been excellent in my local store, and yeah, they're just really handy. Like, there's no other store where I can be working on a project and go, oh, forgot to buy this component, and just run out and then buy it off a shelf. But to be honest, the business model just wasn't really profitable anymore. It was sort of summed up recently when I was doing a project and needed to buy a relay, and there was two members of staff helping me for about 10-15 minutes to buy a relay that ultimately cost me a couple of quid. Like, that just can't be profitable, to have staff spending all that time to sell a part that costs absolutely nothing. So it is a real shame, but that's just obviously how the market is. But anyway, let's take this thing apart. So here it is. It's a fairly heavy thing, and it's built inside one of these standard Hammond enclosures that Maplin used to always sell. And it's got these sort of sticky strips in the back, so we appear to have some genuine bits of the wall of Maplin Edinburgh, which appears to have been ripped off when they've taken it off the wall. And that's it there. So on the front it's just a sticker which looks like it's been printed on an inkjet if you look up close on it. So it definitely feels like it's been built in really small quantities. And yep, that button, you press that and it lights the LEDs up. And it keeps them going for quite a long time. And then if you can't really do it, if you keep pressing it doesn't change, you have to wait for it to go off again and then press it again. But then there's 4 screws on the top, so let's get inside this. I'm interested to see what's in this because I don't know how old it is. It might be fairly modern and just be based around a sort of modern day microcontroller type thing, or it could be older and have be built around weird discrete components. So it'd be interesting to see what it's actually made of and how it's built, because this thing can't have been made in big quantities. It appears to have been built purely for Maplin. I can't find any reference to these devices online for other companies. So it is going to be really interesting to see how this is constructed, really. It was definitely worth picking up for a couple of quid to make a video of. I also will admit that I actually didn't really have any plans, anything to make a video of this week, so this came along at the right time. So I'm taking the screws out, so let's see what's inside. Okay, there we go. So we've got some batteries there, and yeah, we can see under there it does actually have a PCB. So it's a PCB and there's a single chip on that. So I'm guessing it's the first scenario I mentioned where it's built around what's probably some sort of modern day microcontroller. So that's it there, and we've got 3 AA batteries in it, which of course, because it's from Maplin, are actually Maplin AA's. Let's take those out and promptly throw them all over the place. It's a very springy battery holder. And we can now see this is held on with 2 screws. And they've actually used what looks like a PCB mount battery holder slotted into a pin header on the board. It's quite an interesting way of doing it. It's fairly neat construction actually. So there's now 2 screws in the battery holder to take out, and we can hopefully lift that off and see what's underneath. Cool, so that battery holder is lifted off. And as we can see, that is just a standard PCB mount battery holder, which, yep, Maplin sell this. I'll need to look up the model, the order code, but that is a standard Maplin part they would sell. And now we can see the PCB underneath, so let's go in closer. So now here we can see the main board, and as I sort of suspected, it's based on a simple single microcontroller. And in this case, it's the ATtiny24, which is actually a fairly modern microcontroller. There's then just the 2 LEDs, a resistor for each LED, this unpopulated area, which we'll take a look at and figure out what that's for, and then the button just connects to the board there, and then that's the header for the battery, where there's one labelled ground and one labelled pause, which is probably for positive. In the bottom right hand corner there's this logo, which I don't know what that's for. I don't know if it's like the manufacturer that designed and built this entire device, or maybe if it's just a manufacturer of PCBs and they've just bought the PCBs from a company. So now let's take the board out and see what's on the underside. So it's held in with these sort of risers, so we just take that off. Both there, that can come off. And then the whole thing, yep, just lifts out like that. So we've got the 2 LEDs connected on there, which are, I think, 10mm LEDs, and then the big button wired on there. And on the underside of the board, there's nothing really to speak of, although we can see it does definitely look like it's hand soldered with lots of flux residue around things. So what I'll do is I'll go away and try and figure out how this is wired, because what I'm noticing is it's actually there's a bit more going on here than I thought. There's a few wires there connecting to this header, which then go to the microcontroller that aren't actually connected to the battery. So I'm wondering if those are for like programming. I'm interested to see what this unpopulated area here would be used for. So yeah, I'll go away and sort of reverse engineer this. I've also just noticed that there's a date code here of the 3rd of December 2014. So it's actually a fairly modern device. I've also looked it up, and it turns out Maplin was bought by its sort of current owners, or the owners that started the liquidation, Rutland Partners, around the middle of 2014. So I'm wondering if when they came in, they started all sorts of new policies, and one of those was to do this staff random searching, because that would sort of line up quite nicely. The new owners come in, and then this device is made a few months later. So I've now channeled my inner Big Clive, and I've drawn a circuit diagram for this. It's obviously not great, I'm not an expert at this, but we'll take a look anyway. So down the left hand side, we have the pins. So these are the pins that are on this header here that the battery connector connects into. So as you can see at the top we have negative, and at the bottom we have positive, and that's what the battery holder goes into. Then we've got those other 4 pins which connect up to various pins on the microcontroller. I've looked up the datasheet for the chip, and we've got the pin out. So what these are is obviously for the SPI bus. So there's the 3 pins for the SPI protocol, and then the reset pin. So I'm guessing that is for programming this. So imagine when they're making this, they'll have some sort of cable that'll plug into this header here, and it'll connect up the power supply, and then the serial SPI pins to some sort of programmer or computer. They'll then plug that in, power the chip up, program it, take it out, and then they can just plug the battery holder in instead and just power it over the same 2 pins. So I'm guessing that is somehow how they're programming this device. Then you've just got the 2 power rails which connect to the microcontroller, and then you've got some 2 pins coming off the microcontroller going to the LEDs. So you've got the red LED and the green LED, where the positive side is connected straight to the microcontroller, and then the negative side is connected to the negative rail via a resistor. What I then noticed is we've got this mystery pins, these 2 pins that aren't actually populated. I didn't really know what they were for. I wasn't sure if it was for some sort of switch or additional LED or something like that. But as we can see here, it's connected across between the output that goes to the red LED and the negative rail, and there's no sorts of resistors or anything here. So if I had to guess, given how it's wired and the sort of form on the motherboard, on the PCB, I'm guessing this would be for some sort of buzzer or sounder. So they could put a buzzer on that or a sounder, so when it goes to red, which is the search light, it'll make an audible sound. but obviously that isn't populated, but that's what I guess that's for. And it does work. When you push it and the red light comes on, it puts about 5 volts across those pins. The final component we have is a switch, which is just the main button here, and that goes between the negative rail and one of the pins on the microcontroller. And there's no sort of resistor or anything here, so they're obviously using an internal pull-up resistor built into the microcontroller itself. One thing that just occurred to me with this is that the power supply is always connected to the microcontroller, and then the switch is connected to the pins on that, which means the microcontroller is never completely powered down. So I thought it'd be interesting to see what the current draw is to see how long the batteries will last in standby when it's not being used. So what I've done is I've very badly bodged it. I've just shoved one of the probes in here, and I'll just touch it onto this pin here, which is effectively the negative rail. And you can see when it starts up, it does this sort of little blinky pattern of the LED to show it's initializing. It sort of alternates between the two, but it doesn't really come across on camera. But you can now see it's off and sitting at idle, and we're pulling about 2 point something milliamps. It sort of drops down and settles around about 2 milliamps, which if the batteries are, say, I don't know, 2500 milliamp hour or something like that, and it constantly does this, and there's not some sort of sleep where the microcontroller, when it sits idle for a while, goes into a lower power state than this, which I somewhat doubt, it means you maybe get about 50 odd days of battery capacity before it just dies sitting completely at idle. So it's somewhat interesting, because they could have probably made it so that the microcontroller would pick one of the LEDs on startup and then connect the button across the power supply. So you just, when you push the button in, it powers up and lights one of the LEDs. It means you'd have to hold the button down to keep the LED on, but it would stop this sort of standby current drain. But oh well, that's how they've done it. So yep, sort of about 2.2 milliamps at standby. And then if we press the button in, we'll see it'll light one of the LEDs. And now it's pulling about 16.5 milliamps. And then when the LED goes off, it drops back down to about 2 and then rises up a little bit. So yeah, that's the current draw on this. So there you go, that's it. It's not the most complicated thing in the world. I was hoping it would maybe be a wee bit more complicated, so it would be built around discrete components, but it's just a bit more modern than I thought it would be, so it's just got a microcontroller. But it was still worth taking apart anyway, and it was worth a few quid just to make a video on. So yeah, there you go. That was a look at the Ex-Maplin colleague search button. It's definitely interesting. I'm guessing it is some sort of very low quantity device that's probably been either built by them or contracted out to a company who's just built them purely for Maplin. So it is always quite interesting seeing these devices that are never mass produced. They're built in really small quantities, largely by hand. So yeah, pretty fun thing to take apart. So there you go, thank you very much for watching, and there'll probably be a future video that'll be a bit more interesting than this. I've just got a fair bit more prep to do for that, so that'll be coming out in a few weeks hopefully. But yeah, that was a quick video for today.